Hello. Okay. Right. So, welcome back, and today is the first video in the Introducing series, which is going to be a series on badass women in history. It was offered, so it's been done. As you can see, I have now stolen 99 Blocks' setup, so nice camera is much better and less shaky. So yeah, all good guys. And we are starting with the founder of modern feminism, Mary Wollstonecraft. If you don't know who she is, obviously I'm going to explain it, but quick rundown. Involved very heavily in the French Revolution, very out and about women's rights, made sure she was only married once, but had 2 other affairs. So, yeah. She was man's worst scourge, basically, at that time. She was very, very independent, and hence why I thought it'd be a good way to start with her. Like, where better place to start than the founder of modern feminism. She was born into a generally well-off family. It was not aristocratic, not lowly, just, kind of middle class. But ran out of money quite early on, wasn't very educated in formal education. Her father spent a lot of the money on gambling and booze, because, that's how it normally goes. But, however, did a lot with her mother, did a lot with her sisters in nurturing them, making sure that they were okay, always making sure that they were happy, healthy, and she was the one in charge, effectively. Later on, when her sister was married and had just had a kid, for whatever reason, she wasn't happy. It was quite possible postpartum depression, but made sure that her sister got out of the marriage. It did end up causing, her sister ended up living a much worse life because of it, because of the social norms at the time, but Mary Wollstonecraft was challenging those right from the start. Her early life was sort of formed by 2 relationships she had. Not romantic relationships, though possibly, you never knew. They were formed by 2 friendships she had when she was younger. There was Jane Arden, and that made sure that she attended lectures with her, and philosophy lectures, and chemistry lectures, and history lectures, everything she could get her hands on. She also quoted this as, she has the romantic notions of friendship, so take that what you will. Her second big friendship of the time, and it massively influenced her life, was with a girl called Fanny Blood and her family. The Blood family became like family to her after her mother passed away. She had previously already gone off to be a governess, and she became a governess later again in life, but for whatever reason could not get on with the mistresses. Got on very well with the children, but couldn't handle the authority. She moved in with the Blood family, and it was from there that she struck out by herself for the first time. And they went to Stoke Newington and set up a school in a dissenting community. Dissenting in the terms of still religious. There was always, religion was the cornerstone of British society at this time. But they were Unitarian, so Protestant to a certain extent, but they believed in God as a entity rather than a trinity, like most Christian faiths still believe in. They believed in, they rejected the concept of original sin, which is more Catholicism. They didn't believe in predestination, and also, most importantly, they didn't believe in the infallibility of the Bible, meaning that the Bible was not always correct. And this was the faith that she built the rest of her life upon. She did a lot of things that, well, to say that, like, major faiths were not okay with. She lost a lot of friends and she lost a lot of favour in the media and in social circles throughout her entire life due to her choices and due to her religion and due to her politics. She, again, spent more time as a governess, this time in Ireland. Oh yeah. And but again, left because couldn't take the rules effectively. This is where she went on to become an author full time, and it is for her novels and she only did one children's novel, but for her politicized books and vindications is probably the best term. In her politicized books is where she became famous. It's through Joseph Johnson that she met other radicals like Thomas Paine and William Godwin, who would, well, hold on to him, he'll come back again. Oops, sorry, paper turn. It was at this point in London that she started an affair with a married painter called Henry Fuseli. It wasn't a very long-term affair, mainly because she was by herself, asked for a platonic living arrangement with him and his wife, and obviously the wife was a bit like, no, how dare you had an affair, she can't come stay here. So yeah, to save face and save the embarrassment of what had happened, because, well, she didn't care, society definitely did, she ran away to France, and this is where she spent the next few years, not through all of her own decision, but this is where her works were shaped. She travelled to France at what was about 3 years into the French Revolution at this point. She'd written a Vindication on the Rights of Men 2 years previously. This was possibly her second most important work and what would base her most famous work on. This was in response to a conservative politician at the time, Edmund Burke, who wrote a critical book on the French Revolution called Reflections of the Revolution in France. Side note, I would say read it. If you are not into conservatism, you are going to spend the entire book raging, seriously. But it's where you can see the cornerstone of modern conservatism in Britain, and it's well worth a read, even if you don't agree with his principles. Wollstonecraft was a massive admirer of the revolution at this point. She called it a glorious chance to obtain more virtue and happiness hitherto in our world so far. She honestly thought that the world was going to be a much better place because of the revolution in France so far. It was a revolution that had not been seen in Western world at this point. It was bizarre, because before this, no one touched kings. They were almost like gods, and some called themselves gods. It was a regime that was massively indoctrinated in European society at this point. So for poor people to raise up and be like, no, we are getting rid of you, it was a massive thing, and it shook Europe to its core, like, massively. But about 1792, it was still relatively safe in certain circumstances. It was only the aristocrats and the king and queen that were afraid, effectively. They were the only people that needed to be afraid. She arrived in Paris in late 1792, and it was about this point that Louis XIV was about to go. Despite not liking the monarchy at all, she felt that he was still proud in the face of death, which was something that no one was ever really going to call him until it actually happened. However, she aligned with the wrong political party, effectively. There were multiple political parties in France at this point. However, only one was going to become the political party at this point, and it wasn't the one she chose. The one she chose, the Girondins. Yeah. They were all going to have their heads cut off a year and a half later. It wasn't good. So she aligns herself with the Girondins. Unfortunately, the Jacobins, and possibly you've heard of him, Mr. Robespierre, took power. And it was at this point that foreigners started being put under surveillance, and this was the start of the Reign of Terror, which is the one that everyone associates the French Revolution with. It's the one where the guillotine keeps on going. People lost their heads in thousands. Because she wasn't a French woman, she was safe for now. She had to provide a lot of documents and be like, I promise I'm not spying on you, sort of thing. She did try to leave France for Sweden, was unsuccessful, unfortunately. The borders were closed. What made it even worse was that the February of 1793, France declared war on Britain, which meant that all British subjects were under even more scrutiny. Thankfully, at this time, she had begun an affair with a man called Gilbert Imlay, an American. They never actually married, but they said that they had, in order to gain her the American citizenship she needed to not have her head cut off. Which was happening all around her. Other British subjects were having their heads cut off. The Girondins mostly all lost their heads in 1793. There were a couple that had split off, but even Robespierre's best friend lost his head in 1794 at his orders. So it was Mr. Danton, Mr. Dumoulin. Yeah, it was not a safe time. And it was only due to the American citizenship she had that she was saved. She wrote The Vindication of Rights of the Woman in 1792 in response to a man named Talleyrand, a bishop in France, going into French Parliament at the time and saying that women should only receive domestic education, meaning cooking, cleaning, nothing else. They weren't supposed to have any kind of education. This obviously angered her because very pro-rights. She was an educational mastermind at this point. She was the leading light, or one of the leading lights. And so she wrote, and this was The Vindication, and this became her most famous work, and is what she's still remembered for effectively today. She felt that this idea was only being perpetrated by the French in a sort of response to Rousseau, who was a philosopher a little bit before the French Revolution, and Rousseau believed that women were, the ideal woman was a helper to man, and despite the fact of his great political theories, no good. So this is how she wrote her response, and it became a massive bestseller. So, you know, can't really argue, can you? It was also at this time that she had her first child, Fanny, who was named after her friend Fanny Blood, who had been like a sister to her. Her daughter took Imlay's name on the basis that it looked like they were married, but weren't actually. So her daughter was officially born out of wedlock, but nobody knew. However, Imlay did manage to escape Paris, escape France, and he didn't want to be tied down, effectively. Wollstonecraft was like, I want to settle down, I've got a child now, or like, can we just have a house? And Imlay didn't like that. He was just like, I'm just going to the shop for cigarettes, and basically never came back. She finally left France in April 1795, managed to go back to London, despite the fact that the British were like, well, you've been in France for 2 years, what were you doing? And because she was still American, there was very little they could do. There's also another book she wrote in Paris called The Historical and Moral View of the French Revolution. Now, this was a difficult piece for her to write on the basis that she wanted to give an accurate description of the French Revolution, and she also wanted to try and condemn the Jacobins to a certain extent without looking like she favoured the French Revolution too much. Because obviously no one was really a fan of the Jacobins cutting off thousands of heads. So it was a bit of a difficult book to write, but she got there. And the most poignant moment of this was her depiction of Marie Antoinette, the queen who also had her head chopped off a little after her husband's. She felt that Marie Antoinette was a femme fatale. She was seductive and dangerous, and it wasn't what a woman should be, even in Wollstonecraft's view. But she argued that Marie Antoinette was a woman that was made by the aristocracy, by men. That because men in the aristocracy and the royalty only wanted kids, they only wanted sons so they could pass on the line. It was women were reduced down to her womb. And Wollstonecraft wasn't having that. It was just like, we are our own entity, we are people, we have minds. And despite her own personal opinion of Marie Antoinette, not really liking her, she felt that Marie Antoinette was a product of French aristocracy, and there was only so much you could do about that. It wasn't her fault, effectively. She returned back to London, found Imlay, and Imlay was like, nah, it's okay, I don't want the kid. She tried to commit suicide first time with a kind of opium, and somehow Imlay managed to save her. So he obviously did kind of still love her, but was just like, family is not for me. She tried to win him back with a very, very extravagant love gesture. She went all the way to Scandinavia with her young child to attend some business negotiations for him. Did very well, by the way. Then she came back and he was still like, nah, I'm good, I might have found another woman. And she tried to make suicide again, jumped into the Thames, and was only saved by a stranger who noticed her past jumping off. Eventually she rejoined society and was reintroduced to Mr. William Godwin. I told you he'd turn up again. They really hit it off this time. The first time, not so much. He was a bit annoyed that she'd manipulated Thomas Paine for all the evening, but, you know, they finally hit it off. And this was the one she actually married. Yay! This caused a lot of problems, though, as Godwin was a philosopher as well and had called for the abolition of marriage many times before. The only reason not the only reason, but the probable reason he married her was that she was carrying his child and he wanted to give that child legitimacy, which was what her first child hadn't had. And within this, because they got married, it proved that she couldn't have been married to Imlay, otherwise she would be married to two people at once. They couldn't do that, and divorce was definitely not a thing in these days. So they lost a lot of friends over this, over personal disagreements, over the fact that she had had a child out of wedlock and lied about it, which was technically a criminal offence at this time as well. However, they did the really weird Helena Bonham Carter Tim Burton thing of they actually lived separately. They weren't married very long, but they lived about 20 doors down from each other on the same street, saw each other regularly. I say regularly, they saw each other every day, but they did correspond by letters quite a lot as well, which is kind of romantic in a way, I suppose. And however, she was pregnant and died from childbirth complications. She died from septicemia and infection in 1797. A lot of her work was published posthumously by her husband, who did try to keep a certain amount out of public knowledge for a while because of the poor portrayal it will put on her, and it meant that her legacy was quite affected by this in the end, and it's only recently that she sort of started to come back into main light. Like, people were like, oh no, she had 2 affairs, she had a child out of wedlock. So she was passed over quite a lot for about a century. However, that child did grow up to be Mary Shelley, author of Frankenstein, so you know, badass women do run in the family. She was buried in London, Old St Pancras Churchyard. If anyone's in the region, maybe go check it out. There's her tombstone there. She's not actually there. I think she's in Bournemouth, but her tombstone's there, and it's got a very nice poem on it. So you never know. If you want to go check it out, it's there. And yeah, that is Mary Wollstonecraft in a nutshell. Badass woman, badass revolutionary. What more can you say? She defied society in every way possible. So I thought she was a really good place to start. And I can't remember what's next week. I have made a whole list of people. There's like 40 names on there. I just can't remember what's the next one. Yeah. So I will see you next week for another introducing video. And enjoy your week, guys, and I'll see you again soon. Bye!